What's up, guys? So today on the podcast, Eugene and I are going to share an idea with you guys on sparking some creativity. Obviously, we're going to talk about jiu-jitsu for the podcast, but you could take this same idea and you could apply it to anything off the mat as well. I've personally applied this idea to pretty much jiu-jitsu, to the businesses that I'm involved with, to pretty much anything else in life. But again, I think you'll hear it for jiu-jitsu, and I'm sure you'll be able to see how it applies to other places. Also, before I go through, because I'm sure some of you guys are going to be like, Chewy, I'm just going to fast forward through this stuff because that's what happens sometimes. I'm doing a pre-order on rash guard and shorts till August the 28th. So if you have not already taken advantage of that, head on over to my website at jiu-jitsu.net and all that stuff, and you can find it and order yourself a rash guard, a jiu-jitsu rash guard and shorts. Again, I'm incredibly inconsistent with my pre-orders that I do. I just don't like doing a whole bunch of them because it's actually a lot of work to ship all that stuff out. So I'm not really in the business of being a logistics company. So if you want to get that stuff, head on over to jiu-jitsu.net, check it out, get yourself a jiu-jitsu rash guard and shorts. The rash guards will be ranked, so you'll have everything from white to black. If you don't want to be ranked, you can just go with the jet black. And so that's that. Also, big thanks to our sponsors. We got Charlotte's Web. They are the CBD of my personal choice of CBD. I like it because of the fact that the third-party tested. Whatever's in the ingredients list, whatever's in the, when you look on the back of the supplement facts, whatever in there is what's actually in there. Whatever it says is in there is what's in there, rather than, sometimes, like if you look up some of the data, it's like 70% of the CBD products that they tested for this one study in particular, like what was said was in them was not what was in it.
And other stuff that wasn't supposed to be in there.
Right. So you could be like thinking, oh yeah, I'm getting this great CBD for a great price, and then in reality you're not getting the CBD and you're getting other stuff in you. I'm a stickler when it comes to supplements. I want to get exactly what I think I'm getting. I do the same thing with coffee. Like I weigh out my coffee grounds in the morning. I want to know exactly how much caffeine I'm going to be getting, and so again, I don't want to play around with it. And so with that said, Charlotte's Web is third-party tested, and so what they say is in their stuff is in their stuff. I would encourage you to try out some of their tinctures and their gummies to see what you think about it. I also really like, you can tell me which one it was. It was that little squirt bottle.
Yeah, it was, so they have that. That's a Charlotte's Web one, and they also now have CBD Medic, which is part of the Charlotte's Web family, so to speak. And their stuff, I've been using that, and that stuff is really good.
Well, I haven't tried the CBD Medic, but I've tried the Charlotte's Web, like the balm, like with it's like a little
it's like the pain cream or something.
Dude,
it's nice too. They have a lot of good stuff.
Bro, I used it, and no kidding, I was doing like after I do squat workouts and some of that stuff, like which again sometimes it kind of like makes my knee sore.
Put on my old creaky knees, huh?
Put on my creaky knee, dude. It does wonders. Like I'll put it on like after a shower before I go to bed, rub it on there, dude. Next day feels great. So again, I couldn't encourage encourage people to try it enough. So check it out if you want to do it, guys. I always tell people to try stuff out. If you're going to do a supplement, don't take my word for it. Like try it out before you sink in like $700 into a year's supply or something. But go in there and pick out whatever you want to try and do like a month's worth of testing. And again, you can go to charlottesweb.com and use a promo code Jiu-Jitsu, save 15%. Also, thanks to our sponsor, Epic Roll. Matt over at Epic Roll, just to let you guys know, has a few things going on. If you guys have watched my or looked at my Instagram posts or any of the community page posts on YouTube, you've seen a couple of the shirts been on there before. There's the triangle shirt. There was the neon belly shirt, spelled neon. Neon, like neon belly. Get it? Play on words. But he's got the neon belly shirt, which has been pretty popular, and he's turning it into a long sleeve rash guard, which will be available soon, so you can check that out. And he told us he's doing something with Tom DeBlas. He's doing a gi collaboration. So if you want to check that out, you can go over to his website at epicrollbjj.com. And again, whatever he's up to, if you end up buying something, just use the promo code Jiu-Jitsu. It'll save 15% on the order, supports the podcast, and again, it'll save you a couple bucks. And also thanks to our sponsor Jugo, which is the jiu-jitsu, I said jiu-jitsu, it's not jiu-jitsu, it's jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu card game. I don't know of any card game for jiu-jitsu, but basically if you get Jugo, what you get when you order it, you get a set of dice and you get a bunch of cards in there, and the cards are focused on position, a submission, sweeps, takedowns, things like that. So for instance, like I'm looking at the cards right now, I've got an arm bar, I've got a stand-up sweep, The artwork's fantastic. I got the back, which is a backpack with looks like almost like some zombie hands around it. A single leg takedown. So again, it's got all these different things, and basically the idea of the game in a nutshell is you combine like sweeps and dominant positions and takedowns with different things. And you combine these things together to make a sort of an attack that you use against a player. When I got a hold of the card game originally, I think it was back right when the quarantine started, and Jess and I, my girlfriend, we started playing a couple times, and it was interesting to just kind of see her, because she's kind of a beginner, and her wheels are spinning in her head as she's like, does this one connect with this one? Is this the right sweep for this position? And so the wheels were spinning in her head. So I think it could be a useful tool for people that are kind of getting started early on, where they're kind of trying to figure out these different positions and stuff like that. And I could also see it being fun for the kids. So I left a deck of the cards by the spot where our kids do classes. So I'm going to see how they end up liking it. But you can check it out at jugoplay.com. The spelling is JIUGOPLAY.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu, and you'll save 10% on your order. If you guys would like to support the podcast directly, I'm going to use my radio voice. You can head over to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, where you can get access to hours upon hours. It has to be somewhere around hundreds of hours of content.
Could be some days. Spend some days.
I mean, it's way more than days. I mean, like a day is not that much. Like 24 hours is way more than that.
It's a lot.
There's a way more than. I mean, there's like hundreds of episodes. So basically, if you're curious about what we got in there, I said curious. If you're curious about what we got going on in the back end of the Patreon, basically, every time we have a podcast guest on, we ask them a particular question that usually involves something actionable that someone could take to their own training. So basically, you'll get actionable tips from black belts and from all the different guests that we've had on, something specific that you can use for your training. That'll be in the back end. We also post some different specific videos. So for instance, there is a seminar, a whole length seminar with rolling, uncut, raw, unedited, that you can check out in the Patreon that I have up there. We also have recently released a video with Joe and me just doing a leg lift, so you can see the kind of exercises that we use as we're warming up before our leg lifts, and the kind of things that we do when we're doing our leg exercises. So you can check that out. And again, you get all of this stuff on the Patreon. It's available for less than $0.25 a day, 23.3 cents or something, right? What are you laughing about?
I don't know. 0.3.
Point
The 0.3. That's
hey,
just,
it's something.
That's where I draw the line, Chewy.
Okay. Well, it's 23
0.3. I just
23
can't.
cents. So for less than $0.25 a day, you can jump in there and get all that stuff. Again, it's a membership, so you join. It supports the podcast. It allows us to make more stuff for you. And then also at the same time, you get a lot of access to a bunch of content. You can also send in questions to the guests that we have, everything else. But with that said, if you decide that you don't want to do it anymore, you can always cancel it anytime. So check that out at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. All right, guys. So today I've got a really useful idea that I think would be really helpful to you on and off the mat, right, with your jiu-jitsu training, but really anywhere else in your life. And I'll explain what that idea is in a second, but I kind of want to lead up to it. So when you don't have any sort of boundaries or any sort of limitations, if nothing like that exists, there's no structure to it, there becomes an endless number of options, and that becomes overwhelming because you really can't make sense of anything. Like imagine, for instance, if you and I were going to play a basketball game. We get on the court and we have a ball, but then there's no rules. We don't know, do we have to dribble? What's dribbling? Like how many steps can we take? We don't know. Fouls, you can foul. There's no such thing as a foul because we don't have any rules or any structure on it. As far as the points go, I don't know. There's no points, or there's no idea on how many points is a particular type of shot that you take. You get the idea. And if you were going to try to do that, if you were going to try to play a game like that, it wouldn't make any sense, right? And even just trying to make a decision would be just incredibly hard because, again, you have no idea what's going on. And jiu-jitsu is no different. When you step on the mat, there is structure to it, because if you had no structure to it, if all of a sudden they said, all right, roll, and again, there's no limitations to slamming or punching or kicking or the types of submissions you can use, the types of moves you could use, it would become overwhelming. And so having some sort of structure allows for a certain amount of creativity. And having limitations, which, when we think of the idea of limitations, it makes us think that, it's limiting in a certain way. But honestly, when you have limitations, it allows you to zero in on something specific that then allows more creativity. So going back to basketball, I know a lot of people watch that Last Dance documentary, right? So you would watch guys like, in the documentary you had Dennis Rodman, who was basically just focused on getting rebounds, and he became very creative in the way that he did that because that's all he was focused on. You had Michael Jordan, who was incredibly creative for his time and was doing all these different weird shots that other people weren't doing at the time, and so they were creative in their own space. If you watch jiu-jitsu, you see that a lot of times you have these different jiu-jitsu practitioners that become very focused on a particular position or technique or whatever, and they get very crafty at that particular movement, that particular position, that particular technique. And you'll start to see them set up this one technique, this one position in multiple different ways. And it's because they create this limitation, because they're not focused on everything. They're focused on this one thing. They're focused on this very specific thing, and it's limiting in one way, but it's very liberating in one way, because yes, you're limiting yourself, but by limiting yourself, you're then allowing sort of a greater amount of thinking to go into just doing this one particular thing at a time. And sort of the last sort of thing I'll share with her, sort of analogy with you, not even an analogy, but a story that I was listening to. I'm kind of a geek in the fact that I don't really play video games much anymore like I used to when I was younger, but I enjoy actually listening to people like game developers talk about the history of video game making, because it's interesting that you have these people that take these things that then are, and I hate to say it like this, but they're almost addicting, right? For a lot of people. And it's like, how do you guys go about doing all this stuff? And there's so much that goes into making these games, and I find it interesting. I don't know why, but I find it interesting. But I was listening to a guy who he was an artist, a graphic designer back in the late 80s, early 90s for LucasArts and Lucasfilms, or Lucas Software, whatever it was back then, and was making these different games that were incredibly popular. And he was using what at the time was called EGA graphics. For any of you computer nerds, you know what that is. But basically, you had like a very limited number of colors. I think it was like 16. You had 16 colors. That's it, right? That's it. No more, right? That's it. And so they started getting into this thing where they could make palettes, and they shifted it a little bit. But basically, they had 16 colors to work with. And he said that having that limitation was actually kind of liberating in a way, because you had to get really good at using what you had. And he said you had to get really creative about using these programs to make something. Whereas now, he says, there's no real limitations to what you can do with technology. And so it's sometimes it's overwhelming because there's so many choices. Whereas back then, you could play with this program and, you could really get creative with it because you had to be. And so in his mind, he says that even today, when he goes in to do a project, he will limit himself to particular like colors or particular palettes or whatever it is, basically to sort of recreate that limitation and then allow him to have more creativity. And so something for you guys with your jiu-jitsu game, with your training, and I mean, honestly, maybe we'll talk about this later on, but even in my like personal life or my business life, this idea of limiting things to allow more creativity to flow through has been incredibly useful. But going back to training, one of the things that you can do, and this has always been useful to me, and I talk about this a lot, is limiting yourself to a particular position or technique or whatever it is that you're trying to work on, and really focusing in on that. Recently, when we first came back to the gym after the lockdown, I was really focusing on like just full guard stuff. I was like, I want to work on full guard, since we're kind of coming back from a reset, and full guard's kind of the most basic position. So we come back from the lockdown, and we're doing full guard. And when I was playing full guard, I'm using basic white belt techniques that my training partners can see coming a mile away. And because they could see them coming a mile away, I had to learn how to figure out new ways to set them up. So this way it would throw them off the scent, so to speak. Right. And so again, that was really fun. And what's cool is I ended up creating or sort of figuring out a new setup to a particular sweep. That's a really basic sweep, but figured it out. And then I was able to show it to my students, and one of my students who's doing a competition, he goes and uses it in a competition. He's a brown belt, and so he used like this basic hip bump sweep to a triangle. And nice. So it's kind of neat. And so that's kind of the idea to share with you guys today.
Chewy, what do you think you've seen? Think about maybe 10 years ago, about when you started coaching 8-10 years ago, versus like even when you started to today. Like what do you see? Like, is there a certain are there different questions you're getting from students? Is the progression kind of different because there's so much more out there? Like, what do you think you've observed over the years, like as far as like student development, technique, and skill wise? I was just thinking, like, I'm just like,
so come back to me like with one, because there's a few questions in there. Is in regards to skill gain and stuff,
just like maybe like even acquisition of basic, positions like guard or sweeps from guard or anything. Like, do you feel like students, because there's so much more out there, that's impacted their development in any way?
I think so. I think the one thing that I've seen is that there seems to be not as strong of a focus sometimes, not always, and I'm generalizing here, so it's not for everybody, but there sometimes seems to be basically
like they know more, but they're not as fine-tuned in like specific
impatience.
Okay.
It's this impatience to like get down, like get away from the fundamentals and go do the fun-looking stuff. Obviously this is typically early on, because I feel like the more you get into jiu-jitsu, the more that you kind of like keep things fundamentally sound and you focus on that stuff. I mean, granted, you'll always have your good positions or whatever, but
your little YouTube positions, so to speak. You bring like a YouTube video and you'll see it all the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I like that sometimes.
Sure,
sometimes there's good stuff out there.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of good people showing stuff on YouTube, right? There's this one guy who has a beard who I think his channel's called Chewjitsu. He's really good, yeah. But no, there's other guys on the internet that show really great stuff.
Right.
But there are sometimes you get these social media techniques, and this is where you get how like people will call like different things like thirst traps. You ever heard that?
Mm-mm. Like
basically people that are fishing for likes and comments and stuff, like and it'll be like a man or a woman who's taking like a very like a guy will have his shirt off and he's in his underwear or something like that, or the woman will have herself very scantily clad and just like fishing for the social media likes.
Yeah.
Well, it's no different with like some of these moves, because sometimes I see these moves, I'm like that's not gonna work. Like, I've never, like, because here's the sniff test. If you're looking at some move and someone's trying to show it to you,
yeah,
go see if you can find it in a match or a hard roll. Like, otherwise it becomes theoretical. It's like, for instance, like back in the day, everybody wanted to make fun of like kung fu guys, like, because they would, or these, we'll watch McDojo, and you'll watch like these guys like do some silly stuff where they're, like punching the wall or punching the guy and the guy falls into the wall or whatever, all this kind of crazy stuff. Well, I mean, some of these techniques that get shown are no different. You're just as bad. You're showing a technique that's not going to work. It's not fundamentally sound. It looks cool because the person's going along with you.
Right.
Just like when the guys like, what is that thing called? The thing where the Russian guys, like, they hit them.
God, Sistema.
Yeah, like where like they're hitting them and they like fall over and stuff. And
but aren't there like various?
You've got overweight Fedor. He's like
that guy. He lays down and like just
he like lays down and like
over his belly.
He like lays down and he touches them with his big toe and they fall over and flip. Like, yeah, it's like because they're going with it.
Sure.
But it's no different than watching one of these dudes like flip around upside down and then all of a sudden he ends up in the back, and it's like, that looks cool, but it's like nobody does that. Like, I've never seen it happen in a match, so it looks fun.
Yeah.
And I mean, who knows? Prove me wrong. Maybe it works. But, most of the time when you watch matches, you'll see like flittering, like some glimpses of things like that, but they're not quite as crazy as that. I think a lot of times that stuff is that social media moves. Yeah. It's to me like the jiu-jitsu equivalent of a guy like standing in his underwear or a woman standing in her bra to attract people to like them, right? It's like, look at me, look at this cool thing I did, because the fundamentals are kind of boring.
Yeah.
Like for instance, when I go to seminars, right? I start almost all my seminars off with like, all right, guys, how many of you guys, raise your hands, have been to or watched my videos? And I mean, almost all the hands go up. And I tell them, good. So you're not expecting me to show you anything fancy, because I don't do it. Because again, I'm a fundamentally based guy. I like the fundamentals more. Now, I have a few kind of neat little moves that you can throw in there, which again they hit. But I'm a practical guy. I think I get it from my mom. My mom, like she, like you could offer my mom a beautiful piece of jewelry or a vacuum. She'd take a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
She'd be up there like friggin' vacuuming the whole damn house. But for me, I'm the same way. I'm like, yeah, it looks cool, but like I'd rather do that really simple move that works rather than have this really cool looking move. I don't need that.
Do you think maybe not for the beginners, but maybe for the experienced grappler, like you could maybe pick something up from some of these social media moves? I mean, is there anything? I feel like maybe any ideas. I mean, is there any benefit to watching them?
I mean, maybe maybe there is. I don't know. My thing is like, because again, some of the stuff can work, I'm sure, but my thing is, for me, is like I always kind of like, do I see people hitting it?
Right.
That's really like, that's the thing that I focus, because for me it's like, I've only got so much time in my life. I've only got so much time in the day, and I see these things working. I'm going to go with what's working. Now, that's not to say you can't innovate a little bit. You can make adjustments or whatever else. But before I'm going to worry about like breaking the rules, I'm going to make sure I learn the rules.
Right.
You know, and I think that sometimes, like, I'll see young guys that are like young blue belts and like late in their white belts, 4-stripe white belts, like doing videos and like, hey guys, I made up this new guard. I'm like, come on, man. Like give it a couple years. Like give it a couple years. Put in your apprenticeship. It's like put in your apprenticeship first, and then come out and create some stuff. Learn the rules and be a hell of a follower first, and then come out later on and you can lead.
Yeah.
I've talked about this before. It's like, you got to be a like, I think even like Jocko and some of those guys have talked about this. You got to be a good follower before you can be a leader. For sure. Like, and I think that first, like, you should be focused on learning the rules. It's like I've used this quote probably to the point where it's worn out, but I think it's so good because, like, when you look at jazz, like they do jazz, like there's a lot of improvisation in jazz, right? So basically, you'll hear someone do a jazz improvisation during a song that they may never do again, and they're just doing it on based on how they feel. It's all intuition, and the way that they get to that point is they learn the basic rules so well that then it becomes ingrained in their body, and they're just doing stuff, right? They're playing the music based on how they feel. And there's that quote by Charlie Parker. It's like, you master the music, you master the instrument, and then you forget all that shit and just play, right? And so I think that you have to get to that point. You need to spend a lot of time, learning the stuff that works, that good core fundamental stuff that works. Not to say that you can't play. Play is really important for jiu-jitsu, and just screwing around. I think honestly that's where probably some of those weird moves and one-offs, like that's where they have a place, is just play. Like, let's see what this thing happens. Let's see if I can try this. Fun, just for fun, and see, maybe you get something from it, But if you're talking about like spending like your bulk of your time, you should be focusing on that core stuff that works, that you can see people using and all that stuff. And then later on, you get to a point where all of a sudden you start creating your own stuff. Yeah, because you have that deep knowledge.
I think for me, like some of the lapel game, it's been around for a while, but there's a lot of newer elements. Like Keenan always adds on to it. And we talked about Nick Pabone, who's one of our black belts. That's become over time has been a big part of his game. I don't know when it even started for him.
He started about a year and a half ago.
Really, and it's just a huge part of his game. And not a traditional. Not a lot of guys play that specific game, but I've taken like one element, like one piece, like I've had him show me like one piece maybe from a guard, using it for a sweep or kind of opening up, just for different positions. But I think like, even taking like watching him develop that aspect. But again, he started doing that at brown belt. And I think part of it was the necessity because his body was kind of beat up. And I think it was just something that he felt like he could keep better position and kind of have more control with the lapels. But
well, I think he was already playing the lapels because he would play like half guard and he would do some of that Bernardo Faria stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so it was basically, he took something and said, well, I'm already using the lapel. Keenan's doing a lot of crazy stuff with his lapel. So he started, looking up some of his stuff. Right. And that's where it came from. He was like, basically, he already took something he was working with and was like, well, let's just use it even more.
Yeah. The effectiveness of it was because he had a good understanding, and most of us do have a good understanding of the base positions in jiu-jitsu that you can build off of that because you already have those base things. So I think what I'm thinking now is that a lot of these like newer, like white and maybe young blue belts, like they have a lot more tools, like a lot more things they can do, but they just don't do the basics, or they don't do them as well. They don't have quite a fine tuning of some of the basic positions.
Now I say, and I say that, but here's the thing, like the level of jiu-jitsu is better than what it was when I started.
Exactly, and that's what I was getting at.
I don't want to sound like, back in my day, because younger people today are faced with a much more difficult challenge in that sense. Because when I first started, I didn't have a bunch of techniques. I had instructionals that I could get, and I had to buy those and put them in a DVD like player and play them and sit at a TV and watch them. There was no streaming media on your phone. There was no courses that you could buy and instantly get. Like, I mean, it wasn't there, and the streaming videos that you could find were hard to come by. And I think overall the jiu-jitsu itself, the white belts in the gyms and the blue belts in the gyms have improved far more. I mean, like my blue belts in the gym would kick my ass when I was a blue belt. They have a much better overall knowledge, you know. I just think that sometimes people can get just a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of information, and then it kind of goes back to what I'm saying here. Like, just narrow it down, get rid of that stuff. It's go on a diet. You know, I was reading. I've talked about this idea before, going on like a diet of sorts, like an information diet.
Yeah.
But I'm reading a book right now. It's by a woman named Twyla Tharp. Very interesting name, but she's like a dancer and choreographer and stuff, and she has a book called like Creative Habits, like Learn 'em and something else. I can't remember, but the book's name is Creative Habits, Twyla Tharp. But she's going into just being creative. And one of the things that she says that she'll do is when she needs to get something done, she goes on a diet of information. Right, so she'll like cut out all these different sources of information, like the news and everything else, so that she can focus in temporarily. She'll cut it out so she can focus on the task at hand. You know, even for me, like I've gone on like kind of a diet of sorts because I really can't spend too much time on social media because it's incredibly toxic.
Yeah.
I mute a lot of the stuff that I don't like anyway, but it's just like some of it's just so toxic. So like I stay off there a lot. And honestly, my creativity and my production for everything else has gone up. Imagine that. But, you know, for people that are in jiu-jitsu, especially early on, that's where it can be really problematic, is when you're still sort of, you know, groping around in the dark trying to figure things out. Take some time away from all that stuff. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with more information, but like if you find something you like, hang on to it for a while and limit yourself to it before jumping around. You know, like find some way to remind yourself when you go to the gym, hey, focus on this position. You know, if you're trying to get better with your full guard, work on full guard, these sorts of things, you know.
So if you get, you know, say you're working full guard or closed guard, working on that aspect, when do you know maybe when you've reached a plateau or when to move on to something else? Is there like maybe some kind of idea or some kind of goal to reach in that aspect? You know, because if you are a white belt or a young blue belt, you're still kind of trying to figure it out. And sometimes you may get to a plateau where you're just like either you're not hitting a position, or maybe it's not working for you, and you have to look at some other options. When do you think that would be? Yeah,
it's hard to say. I would say this doesn't only concern blue belts and white belts either.
Sure, everybody.
So for instance, I've got one of the guys, a brown belt. He has a nasty habit of giving up his back. Right, Matt.
Yeah.
So you know, Matt's been competing. He's been giving up his back, and so you know, I've been barking at him during class.
What'd you tell him to do different?
I gave him a couple tips. You know, basically, it's mainly he pauses and then continues to move, and so I'm like, you know, in class, I'm yelling at him to like get him to move, and then when I'm telling everybody that rolls with him, it's like your job is to take his back, and if we get a bunch of people taking his back, I'm going to put him through the ringer over there in the strength conditioning side. I'm going to put him on the Airdyne bike and get him to puke or something. You know, I'm really going to put it to him. And then when he starts rolling every round, he starts in the back. So he starts from back mount, and then he has to escape and that kind of thing. And so within a week, like literally, swear to you, it's a little over a week. Like I went from choking him out multiple times, almost just effortlessly, like a week and a half ago, and then like last night we rolled, and I was having a hell of a time choking him because of his focus on that position. Right, he's been so dead focused on it for almost 2 weeks.
Yeah,
and it makes a hell of a difference. Now, granted, he's a brown belt; he can more rapidly learn things, but there is power in focusing on something. And so again, as far as how long, there is no. This is the thing in jiu-jitsu, and this is the thing with anything. People they want that answer. They want that. They want to have a secure, concrete answer. If you're an intelligent person, you don't want that because they don't really exist, right? For a lot of things, like for instance, we want black and white when most things are gray.
Sure.
Right. When it comes to dieting, we don't want to hear that. Listen, you can eat these foods in moderation and stuff like that, and you got to do this, whatever. No. Just don't eat carbs. Okay, good. I got the simple rule: black and white. That's all I got to do, right? And that's what people want. But if you're intelligent, you don't want that, because those little rules and stuff like that sometimes, in some cases, they're just meant to like get you to do something, right? Get you to buy something, get you to whatever. You don't want to do that. You want to be smart and intelligent. You want to be able to think for yourself. And so when you're going, again, you can move around. But what I would say is that you can think about it like this: let's say that you're getting into a position and you, for instance, from guard. I'll give you an example with me. When I was a white belt, I couldn't do anything from my guard. Couldn't do anything. My coach eventually forced me to play from that guard. And it was during that period where I started to learn how to sweep.
Yeah.
And eventually, after I was able to sweep and be competitive for my back, that he allowed me to go to other positions. Years ago, when I was a brown belt, I had a buddy of mine, Jason Keaton. Shout out to Blind Fury down there in Georgia. Jason has I'm sure he does to this day, but at the time it was incredible heavy side control pressure. He could pin the hell out of you, right? Because he was besides being a judo, he was a judo black belt as well. And there's pinning people. I think he was doing like the Olympics for like the blind and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Doing like some events and stuff for them. And so he was jiu-jitsu black belt, judo black belt, pin the hell out of you, squeeze the hell out of you, and he had a hell of a side control. So what we would do is we would go over on the side on Sundays sometimes, and we would do 2-minute drills where 2 minutes I would start in side control on the bottom, he'd be on top, and I would try to escape. If I escaped, we'd reset. If he stayed on top and submitted me, we reset, do it again. Me, I would take his back, and he had trouble escaping my back. So then I would try to hold him in back, choke him, he would try to escape. And we would just do this over and over again. And for me, I didn't feel satisfied until I was able to, with some reliability, escape his side control. That was when I was like, okay, cool, I don't have to focus on this as much because it's kind of there and we can come back around to it. One last example for you is that I was damn determined as a black belt to hit the flower sweep. Basic sweep that you learn as a white belt, I couldn't hit it to save my life. Couldn't do it. Just don't know why. It just wasn't working. So I said, okay, that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to learn how to sweep. Because for me, I can't give something to someone if I don't know how to do it.
Sure.
And so I was like, I'm going to learn how to hit this sweep. So in the gym, I limited myself to the flower sweep. It took me almost about 3 weeks to a month to really get it going. But I remember there was a class where I hit Chad, Rich, and Ryan Embry all in the same class. Like 3 killers.
No scrubs.
No, freaking super tough dude. I was like, okay, this sweep's good.
Yeah.
I've got a good flower sweep now. I can move on if I want
Gotcha.
to. So for me, it's just like, again, kind of maybe set some sort of goal for yourself and kind of have like what would maybe be a success. And for me, if I can hit a move against a black belt or someone of like comparable skill, it's good.
Yeah.
And again, whatever your thing is, but it usually, I think it's worth focusing on something for 3 weeks to a month at least.
Right.
And then there's some guys that are going to go longer. Like Babone, you were talking about earlier. He's been diving down that rabbit hole for over a year and a half on the lapels. Justin Court, one of the guys in our gym, he was going, he ended up messing his knee up, freak accident, or his ankle, and he couldn't, play that normal top pressure type thing. So he was just basically jumping on people's necks and going for guillotines. Got a damn good guillotine now. He didn't have a good guillotine before.
I remember first day I came back. He was just going for my neck. And it was like my first day back, so I'm just like trying to survive.
Yeah.
And dude, he was just around my neck. And I was like, pretty much made me like gun shy. I was just like, all right, well, I just gotta like watch my head and neck at every instance I can. It was like, but seeing his development, that was really interesting too. Right. It was just like because now he's got this other weapon. I'm like, shit. Now he's got this.
So maybe you never get rid of it. Because for some people, it's like you're never going to stop doing these positions. Like, my half guard and butterfly guard. I mean, once I got good at them, I kept going.
Just always used it. It's always there.
Yeah, because it's one of my core positions.
Yeah.
And so again, everybody's got a little bit something to work on, and I think that changing positions and focusing on something different can spur things up and kind of make things fun again.
Right.
And there is a time sometimes to just go with the flow.
Throw a little lingerie on it. Really is what you're doing. You're spicing it up.
Yeah,
Get it?
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah, spicing up the relationship with
just spicing up the jiu-jitsu. Just spice up like learning like a new position, like or a new tweak on an old position. You're like, oh my god, it's like brand new again.
Why does it have to be about the woman's laundry?
I don't know. Why does it have to be women's lingerie? It could be anybody's.
Couldn't you just come in there with some like a banana hammock or something?
Yes, you can. You can. Anything.
Is that what you do with Mish?
Yes,
banana
exactly. She loves it.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. It's interesting to me that like. We talked about it as gaining a position initially, getting a position or getting a sweep. But then look at the opposite aspect of it. The opposite aspect of it is getting out of a position, avoiding a position, not giving up your back, or even learning, like if somebody else is working that stuff, being on the defense. Like when Nick Pabone was working, we'll go back to him, he was working his lapel stuff. And we were doing pass and defend. Like it was, we were doing like King of the Mat, I think, pass defend. And so you were like, go. When you get out there, don't sit around. There's not a lot of time. Go out and go. He swept me, boom, right away, really fast. And then, like, I think he swept me twice. And after that, I was just like, all right, I got to figure this out. And so I went back and I started really focusing on the grips, focusing on, what he's doing. And that's where that little one position, that little guard break, or no, the grip break that you developed.
The tentacle?
The tentacle, we talked about that. That developed there. And even, I started playing some lapel stuff, and he showed me like one, I think it was like squid, like a squid guard or something. And I started playing that, and I just worked that, and all I did was like just try to get in that position, see if I could use it to sweep. And it's really valuable, man, honestly, like doing that. I think for so many angles, like you're talking about Matt not giving up his back, and then it's like now all of a sudden this is his back defense is very good, or avoiding giving it, and then more things come from that. So I think it's super valuable.
Well, this jiu-jitsu is a create your own adventure book kind of thing. Yeah. Like, where do you want to go? And this is where like a lot of times, this is mainly with newer people. They like want to ask someone, like they'll ask a coach, like, what do I need to work on?
Yeah.
Like, everything, So like one of the things I say is like, if you're going to come to me, come have a specific question.
Sure.
I can give you direction sometimes, but sometimes it's like you're doing fine. You just need to get better. And that's that, But I think that, with everyone, you should always be thinking about like, where do I want to go? Like I remember when I was a brown belt, like back when I was a like early to mid-level brown belt, I was a bigger guy. At the time I was weighing around 225. And I remember I wanted to like have a faster game, because I remember I didn't really move as much as I wanted to.
Yeah.
So then that game that I have now where I'm bouncing all over the place, that came after I was a brown belt and I was watching Andre Gaval's matches, and I bought his drilling book, and I was like going through all his stuff. I was like basically watching the way that he moved, and I was like, I kind of want some of that. So I started mimicking that. I started doing drills to do that. And so again, I developed that game because I actively said, I want that. So I think that everybody should always kind of think, again, you have this should not just be passive. You should be thinking actively. What do I want my game to look like? Like, because you get to decide. Again, especially at a certain point, it's hard maybe in the beginning when you're just getting your fundamentals down. But at a certain point, you get to kind of like decide, especially like, what do you want your game to look like? In the beginning, you even get to decide, but you have much more creative freedom as you continue on.
Yeah, and then as you get a little bit more developed in your jiu-jitsu, like we had Dominica on the podcast talking about. JT was showing her like this kind of squat, kind of standing guard passing. She's like, I was really tall and kind of lanky and just not very coordinated. It was not a good position for me. And so like even discovering, you may figure out you're playing something and discovering that that's not even part of you. It just doesn't work for you.
Right.
And that's okay too. That's a great way to kind of like check things off the list as like something maybe that's just not a viable position for you. And so I think it can kind of help you kind of cut through a lot of trim the fat, so to speak, in that aspect.
Well, sure, because every time you find a position or a technique that doesn't work for you, well, then good. One that you don't need now. It's like, Edison and the light bulb. That's a common, like, a common story that's told, when you're talking about failures and stuff like that, right? It's like, tried X amount of thousands of times to find one thing, and then, each time something didn't work, well, we don't need this one now.
Right.
I don't know the truth to that or not, but the idea behind the story is true. Like every time you fumble with something or realize it's not what you want or need, great. You know one less thing that you need to worry about. And I mean, for me, like I know a lot of positions that I don't personally use it often, but I know them enough that I can teach them for other people
or defend them. Yeah,
defend them, right? So I can defend them or what to teach them, but I don't really use them that much. And so again, I know that, and they didn't work for me, so I'm going to move on.
Why do you think they didn't work for you? Do you think it was like more your style of grappling? Do you think it was your body type?
Body type. I think body type's a big one. Body type's huge. Like we don't really talk about it that much, but I would love to get together with someone that had like a more of a scientific way of like of like it knew how to do like a really good like testing and like analysis, like more of a scientific mind. Because there's a book called the Sports Gene.
Yeah.
And in the Sports Gene, they identify all these different physical traits that like separate sports athletes. Like for instance, in basketball, they're like, it's not just about height. Height's important, but they found that the stronger correlates were their ability, their vertical jump, like how high they could jump in relation to their height, and their length of their arms to their height. So how long their arms were in relation to their height, and then how high their vertical jump was. Those were the two bigger, more accurate markers for determining whether or not a player would make it to the NBA. Because they said you could be really tall but have short arms for your height, and you probably wouldn't do well. And so, again, getting into it, I'm like, I bet that if you got a bunch of people that did similar positions, I bet if you got a lot of them together, you would find some sort of like correlation in the way that their body is shaped or framed or whatever. And so I think that they're, and also, mindset to an approach.
Sure.
But I think a lot of it has to do with the anatomy, of the body. Like it just it's going to limit you in certain ways. I mean, like, for instance, I don't have the best legs for triangles.
Sure.
Even with like injuries and things concerning, I don't have the best legs for triangles. Spider guard, my legs aren't really that long, so I don't have that kind of same control. I can play spider guard well enough, but it's just not my best position. So I tend to favor that half guard position where I can just lock up my leg, and especially up against guys my size, because I'm actually generally not that tall for my weight class. Guys are typically a little taller, a little bigger, so I can always play half guard.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's interesting where you talked about even heavyweight, like Bernardo played a half guard, played kind of a bottom game, which is very atypical. So if you even have that ability to,
at least it was back then,
to develop, back then, you have that ability to develop something like really good, a position that's maybe not frequently used for your size or your weight, and you get good at it, it can kind of throw people off as well.
Oh, sure, because they're not ready for it. A lot of times we always think of intellect. We think if I know the technique, then I'm going to be good. But really what we deal with a lot of times, and especially in the middle of a really fast-paced role, is a lot of intuition. You're going off of instinct and feel. So like if you're going up against someone that plays a position that but you don't have anybody that uses it against you, it's hard because in the middle of a roll, they're going to be a step ahead of you, and you're having to think about it because you only have that move on a very intellectual level, on like a thought process, but it hasn't been wired into the nervous system because you understand that you know this, and anybody that's been training long enough knows this. Like when you're rolling, you don't, especially if it's a good roll, like where you're going back and forth, you don't have time to think. You're just reacting, and you're moving on instinct and moving on muscle memory, and that comes from more to an intuitive level. Yeah,
I do think we see in jiu-jitsu, very basically, you can say, oh, that guy's really tall, lanky. He's probably a bottom player. Probably, he's going to have a good triangle. Matt, we talked about Matt, has a great triangle, so it can kind of give you an idea on what to avoid, I guess, in some aspects. And then like people that are maybe shorter, stockier, they might be, more of a top game type person, pressure passing. But I mean, it doesn't give you it. Even though you're more likely to, maybe be successful at position, being good at other stuff. Like I don't know if I have the best build for like butterfly. I don't know if I do because I'm kind of longer legs, but I really love butterfly. I feel like I do have some good success with it. I just really like it, and I feel like I can do pretty well with it because I think when you're a little more compact, like you're kind of a little more compact, like you said, you're a little bit. You can kind of, I think you can generate. You're being compressed. You can generate.
You can get up under people a little bit easier. You know? But it, there are those anomalies. Like for instance, Rich, one of my black belts, he's really good with triangles.
Sure.
He's not very tall. 5'10".
Yeah,
5'10". But he's got he's got a lot of dexterity in his legs from playing soccer.
Right.
So his legs he has a lot of control with him in really awkward movements and stuff, and so he's able to snap up triangles really well.
Yeah, and I think part of that is his mentality because he's always a very aggressive role.
Sure,
very much attacking.
But he could take his aggressive roll towards any other move, but triangles became his best move.
Yeah,
and I think that again, it's probably due to partly because of the sensitivity and the control that he has in his legs from soccer. Yeah, because the way that a soccer player is going to move their legs is very different than say me, the way that I would use my legs. Because I came from like football and lifting,
right?
So I have these legs that want to press forward and charge. For wrestling, we charge forward and take people down. We don't kick our leg back to an angle to hit like the ball or something. Right. Where he has a lot more probably strength and flexibility in his legs that I don't have, and I think that came into play. So again, another physical attribute that maybe isn't dominated by his actual physical like structure, but still his physical abilities.
Yeah, I think I played soccer as well in high school, and I think there's just so much, like you have to fine tune that aspect. Like for example, we call it the first touch. When somebody passes you a ball, your first touch on like receiving that pass has to be really soft.
Right.
So you have to have really good control and kind of almost like knowing how to slow down the ball without getting it away from you. So I think there's a lot. I noticed I'm drawing the triangles too. I enjoy triangles and playing off my back and stuff. And I think I had certain ability to maneuver my legs in ways just because I was used to it.
Right.
And I use my legs, so I focus so much more on your legs. I think football, for example, you are using your legs, but a lot of it's it's not very.
The legs are these power producers.
Yeah.
Everything else is hands and grabbing and pushing and stuff like that.
I think the only thing with football, like if you're like a wide receiver, you have to know routes. So knowing routes is just more about timing, kind of your footwork, but you're not necessarily moving your feet in different crazy positions.
Yeah, I mean, like because with soccer, or football, like football, you would be you have to have control with your legs.
Yes.
You might literally, I've watched like soccer players, the amount of control and the things that they can do with their legs, and it's like basically having another set of hands down there grabbing the ball and throwing it around. It's incredible what they can do. And so I think that again, like wide receivers are going to run this way, that way, but a soccer player's got to be able to balance this ball and do all kinds of weird stuff. So the sensitivity that they have with sensitivity and the control that they have with the legs, and the sort of the control / the range of motion that they have that control in is going to be greater than, say, a guy playing like wrestling or playing American football.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just think like we have so much more. I mean, the legs are so important in jiu-jitsu as well.
Yeah,
like, so really crucial. So even
they become another set of hands.
Yeah,
like that's like when you like. I remember one of my coaches told me that he said you want your legs to become like you want your feet to be like another set of hands.
Yeah, and one recommendation for people is like be barefoot a lot more in your house. Like think of because that's going to work your foot intrinsic so much more.
Plus, you don't want to bring all that dirt in your house anyway.
Yeah, that's right. but on in if you think about it, like if you take your hands and put them like in gloves or mittens, and just keep your hands in mittens for 10, 12 hours, 14 hours a day, can you imagine how like you're gonna be like trying to move your hands around? They're just gonna be like they're gonna feel dumb.
Yeah.
You do the same thing to your feet. You put them in shoes, right? To protect your feet. You're walking on gravel or whatever else. You're kind of like shutting off all those foot intrinsics. So
sure.
You got to think in jiu-jitsu, it's very important. We use our feet kind of to dorsiflex or bring our foot up to kind of hook or even press off or point the toes and things like that, where you sometimes need to be able to do those things. So I think even just, I know it's a little off topic, but being barefoot is kind of, and plus that's how we train. That's how we train jiu-jitsu, is barefoot. So a lot more control, and then also your balance. Your balance is going to be a lot better. Takedown defense is a perfect example. Even working, like I took that functional range conditioning class, and there's a lot about working just your big toe, working the motion in your big toe, and like even your other toes, being able to splay and spread the toes and lift them independently. So that's something I play around with sometimes. If I'm just sitting around bored, I'll just start moving my toes around and seeing how much control I can have. And it's funny how little you have initially, and then like once you work on it like for a week, you start to discover just so much more like the control of your toes. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, your feet are so like cramped together from shoes and stuff. Because you look at like some of those like indigenous people that don't wear shoes, and their feet like splay out.
Yeah,
it's like they're really. I mean, they're really weird looking to us. Like their feet are really wide apart. I spend most of the day barefoot.
Yeah, it's good for you.
The only time I really put on shoes is if I'm like going outside, like say to get in a car and go somewhere. But even like if I'm walking around the yard, I don't wear shoes. If I'm like in the house, I don't wear shoes. I'm at the gym, I don't wear shoes. I typically only lift in shoes if I'm doing squats. I typically do it barefoot.
Right.
And I just because
Yeah, I think like I'll run in like thicker soled shoes, and the reason why I do like for running, because I'm not a very good runner. But like people
smart too, because like there was.
I'm just not. You're supposed to be in minimal shoes. They say it's the best.
They say
but not
that,
for everyone.
Well, they say that, but the problem is that if you spent 35 years of your life running in shoes with a heel, right, and then all of a sudden you change it and you try to run a ton with like a Vibram or something like that. Like you need to be careful, because like there were like I remember Vibram got into a like a lawsuit.
Yeah, the like 5-finger shoes.
Yeah, like where they were like saying like go run in them and whatever, and people were tearing their Achilles and stuff like that, because they went from wearing like these thick-soled shoes that they were running on to all of a sudden you're running barefoot, like miles and miles, whatever, and then people were getting torn. I remember I got a message or like a letter in the mail. It was like, you were entitled to like whatever the price of the Vibrams were. backs into this lawsuit. Like, because I bought them a long time ago. I was like,
I've got some too.
I was like, I don't want that. I was like, I knew better than that. Like, you can't just you can't take something from your body all of a sudden and change it up and not expect there to be sort of a gradual easing in process.
100%.
That needs to take place first.
Yes. You have to, like, most of us are not very good runners. Our running mechanics are
terrible,
poor.
Yeah.
So you have to train that. You have to, first of all, like, train your running mechanics, then you gradually over time lower the sole, like the thickness of your sole. Yeah. But it's just, everybody wants it right away. Well, oh man, this is the thing. This is the best for me. I'm going to do this right away. Right. It's just like you're not very flexible, and all of a sudden you see all these inverted guards. Like, I'm going to start going inverted all the time.
Well, it would be like saying someone, okay, you're not very flexible, and we're going to have this machine put you in the splits.
Yeah,
probably going to tear some stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
what are you talking? That's BS. Haven't you seen Jean-Claude Van Damme get put in the little machine? And
that was because he was practicing with the Shidoshi.
Yeah. No, so that's an interesting one. Chewy, let's just to wrap it up. When can doing what we're talking about, when can that be a disadvantage? When can, really focusing on these fundamentals, being kind of set in these positions, when do you think is there, I always like to be like devil's advocate.
No, I mean, and you should. I mean, you have to play both because you got to take in new stuff and you got to play around, but you do have to have some focus. And you kind of have to... You have to do this dance with the two. So, you've got to, you've got to have some focus. Obviously, early on, your focus should be on the fundamentals. And then at a certain point, as you gain skill and everything else, you can really just focus on whatever you want to. But then at the same time, you do have to have that sort of time where you allow yourself to play, because that's an important time, right? Hey, I'm just going to play around with stuff. I'm going to go on the mat today, and I'm just going to try stuff out and let you see what happens. I'm going to screw around and make mistakes and just have fun. There's the point. Because the thing is, when you focus on something and restrict yourself, jiu-jitsu can become kind of boring because you're kind of doing the same stuff over and over again. This is the kind of stuff that I do when I'm competing. I focus on my game plan over and over again. But it's fun to mix it up and just play.
Yeah.
And then if you find a move that looks kind of funky and you want to try it out, play around, see what happens. But again, it's those things that's the dessert, right? Like your meat and potatoes, those are your fundamentals. The little fancy weird looking stuff, that's your dessert. It's the stuff that adds on to it. You get that other stuff first, and then you can always have dessert later on. And so I think everybody has to kind of use a little intuition, and you got to get in touch with yourself. So when you're training, are you getting bored? Are you just kind of I'm just doing the same old stuff? It's a good time to mix things up. A lot of people, when they say, I'm having a training plateau, I'm kind of hitting a snag, I feel like I'm just staying the same, I'm getting worse, or whatever that stuff is. Change it up, do something different. Because when you start using new positions, it forces you to grow and change. And then again, sometimes if you're just your mind's just tired, you're maybe a long day at work, and you don't want to think about having to focus on something, just jump on the mat and just sort of using almost as a meditation where you're just going along with it and just seeing what happens. And obviously, early in the beginning, like the very beginning, you just do what the hell you got to do. You just got to show up.
Survive.
You got to survive in the beginning. I mean, that's in the beginning. It's tough to focus on much because you're constantly just trying to not drown.
Yeah.
So, but again, later on, you can start to sort of implement those practices.
Yeah, I do think we had Muhammad Ali come into a seminar.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm going to show you stuff that you've all done.
Mm-hmm.
You've all done, but I'm going to show you a little tweak, or a little variation, or a little different positional way to do this, or how to. And then we all started we were all spent some time going for collar chokes and X chokes.
He changed my collar choke game.
Yeah, and that's something you've had. So even going back to something like that, even you're like, oh man, I don't need to learn any more about this. Yeah. Be willing to delve in, Hodger Gracie, close guard. I mean, his close guard's fantastic, and I think it just gives you so much. It can like we said, liven up those older positions that maybe you're not using anymore, or maybe haven't been effective. You going back to them at a later time, you can kind of almost spark some more interest in there, and develop something good.
Yeah, well, I usually say that about the good, strong, fundamentally sound moves. They're like good books. You read a good book, go through it once, come back to it a year later. You're in a different place mentally. You read it again, you see new stuff. Now, it was always there. The writing was already, it's ink and paper. It was already there. You just didn't see it.
Right.
Like a good technique. You'll come back around and you'll see new details that you missed because you're in a different place. Literally, I've got instructional videos that I've watched for years where I'll watch them, take some notes, try them out, use them for teaching or whatever. I'll come back to him later on and see new details that I missed. I'll notice that his foot positioning was 2 inches different, or like something very small, but I just wasn't in a place to observe it the first time. And then you keep doing that. And so a lot of times there's a lot of utility in coming back to those positions, because you'll start to notice things that you missed before because you are in a different place later on.
Yeah, and sometimes that's all you need, that little bit, and it can just open up a whole, like, another element to a certain position.
Absolutely.
Like I talk about my loop choke. And first, it was just a loop choke. That's all it was. Like, I would just hit it from time to time. And then I was like, oh, well, people know I'm doing it. So now I've got to switch it up, maybe set it up differently, or use it for other purposes like a sweep, or, just getting people's attention to their collar so I can do something else. So I think using it in different ways, even, not even using the position or using a technique, not necessarily for the purpose of hitting the technique, but for the purpose of setting something else up, just giving yourself another kind of roundabout way.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the limitation thing, right? So, for instance, if you're limiting yourself to this thing, eventually people are going to know you're doing it, and then you got to like figure out a new way to you got to put up a smoke screen. Yeah. For me, I take the back a lot.
Sure.
And like I was rolling with one of the guys, Kevin, the other day. And Kevin was telling me that he said his 2020 or 21 goal was to take my back once. Take it back once. I was like, okay. Because if you guys don't know, that's for me, if I'm rolling hard, taking my back is like the thing I don't want you to do. It's kind of like, that's like, it's like hitting Hulk Hogan with the leg drop. Right? And you hit him with this special move. You hit him with his move. So for me, gotcha. I'm a back hunter. That's what I go after. And so when people get my back, that means that they got the better of me. Like JT, when he was out rolling, he took my back, whooped my ass. But so Kevin said that, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take his back. And so I was chasing his back, and I had to set it up where he knew I was going for his back. So I was putting knee on belly to get him to move a little bit and then create an angle and then go for it. Mm-hmm. And again, then you got to be creative. And again, that's one of the beautiful parts about going back to something where you create a limitation. So for instance, Michael Jordan is an example, playing basketball. Everybody knows he's going to take that ball and go to the hoop, right? So he has to be very creative on how he does that, right? Because the same old tricks that he was using before, they've been watching tape. They know it's coming, so he's got to do something different. Right? And so same thing is as you do things and you become synonymous with particular moves or positions, you're going to have to change things and you'll have to disguise them. You'll say, okay, I'm going to go for this sweep to then make you think that I'm not going for the loop choke, but really I'm going to choke you as soon as I get a chance to. Or maybe I go for the loop choke, but then set up the sweep and then try to finish it anyway. So there's lots of ways that you can combine things together because you have to be creative because, again, you're placing that limitation on yourself.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And it's useful. Like you said, it's very it's a great way to really give yourself something to focus on, not feel like you're so scatterbrained. So you just go in and you feel like you're not getting better. Mm-hmm. Just focus on this one thing, hitting this one thing. Get goal setting as well. Like we talked about. Well, when do you know when to move on or when not to move on? If I can hit the sweep 5 times, mm-hmm. or hit the submission a certain number of times consistently. Eventually I think it's kind of like a bell curve. Mm-hmm. Like you won't hit it and then you'll start hitting it a lot and then people know you're doing it and then it's gonna kind of dip down and you have to figure out new ways to do it. So sure. I think that could be a really good, just seeing kind of a bell curve, on your performance could be something to think about.
Well, yeah, it depends on whether or not you want to chase it down. So for instance, if you use the technique and people start to stop it, well, you could decide to go to a new technique, or you could say, well, I really like this technique. I'm going to continue down with this one. Like the guillotine choke for some of the guys in the gym. Chasing guillotine chokes, great. People defend them. They chose to continue on with the guillotine chokes. They continue to figure them out and do more with them rather than move on to something else. So yeah, the people started to defend them, but they decided to just continue with it. So yeah, again, it's one of the things again is with jiu-jitsu is you have to be willing to take direction and have your coach you, but you do have to be willing to think for yourself and think about what do you want to do with this thing. Again, it's your game. It's like you're like making a statue, except for instead of clay, you're having to drill reps and practice movements, so it's a little bit slower. But you're a creator. You're creating your game as you go, and so again, you should be willing to take some time to think about how you want to do this and how you want your game to be, what's working, what's not working. And it doesn't have to be some long, thoughtful, drawn-out process. It could literally be driving home from the gym. What worked today? Like in the beginning, like when I first started training, me and my roommate, we lived together, we would train together, drive home, and we would literally just debrief each other, talk about what happened and how things went. You could literally just do that either with your friend or even by yourself. Just kind of think about what worked tonight, what do I want to do tomorrow, and just give yourself some sort of focus, and then be there.
Yeah, and I think with all the plethora of information out there, use that information wisely. It's like there's so much on just the closed guard or spider guard, whatever. So you can look for inspiration there. Don't get obviously don't get caught in this like tons of data. There's so much out there. But like if you can always find something like closed guard on a position or something like a sweep or something different from what you're working on. You just get an idea, get inspiration that way. That can at least give you some. Because a lot of times you're just doing the same thing and it just won't work. It won't work. And then so you got to find inspiration elsewhere.
Yeah, you can say like, all right, well, triangle chokes are really working for me. Well, then you can go online and just search the triangle chokes.
Yeah.
And like find all kinds of different setups and different positions you can hit them from and all that stuff. I mean, again, you can go down the rabbit hole with just that one particular move rather than having to switch to something brand new.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
All right, guys, so hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. Hopefully you got an idea to chew on for your training. It's Monday if you're listening to this the day that we release it. If you're not, you're listening to it later on. Well, all the same, I hope that you have some ideas to chew on for the rest of your week with your training. And guys, again, if you want to check out the Patreon, it's at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And one of the things that Eugene was making sure that I shared with you guys that I forgot, because I forget a lot of things, is that with the Patreon, besides all that stuff that I talked about in the very beginning of the podcast, you also get early access to the podcast episodes, and you also get the video version of the podcast. So if you would like to look at my bearded face when we're doing these podcasts, or you'd like to look at the guests as they're talking, you get access to that as well, which we don't release anywhere else. So you can check that out on patreon.com/Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And then again, thanks to our sponsor, Charlotte's Web, you can get yourself some CBD and take like I said, try for a month, see what you get. That's the best way. A lot of times with supplements, they don't affect everyone the same. I always encourage people, get yourself some, try it for a month, see what you think. If you like it, great. If not, no big deal. I would encourage you to get one of their tinctures or some of their gummies. Give them a whirl. I personally like taking mine at night because they help me out with sleep. And again, it just helps out with I don't know how else to say it other than it helps sort of relax me as I'm getting ready to go to bed, and just a kind of an overall sense of well-being as I'm getting ready to wind down for the end of the evening. You can check out Matt and Epic Roll at epicrollbjj.com. You can use the promo code Chewjitsu for 15% off. And again, check out his new Neon Belly rash guard, as well as the collaboration gi that he's going to have going on with Tom DeBlas. And last but not least, we have Jugo, the Jiu-Jitsu card game. You can check them out at jiugoplay.com. Use the promo code Jiu-Jitsu and save 10% on the order. If you guys like, this episode of the podcast was sort of based upon one of my emails. So if you like this kind of talk, you might want to join my email list. It's easy to join. All you got to do is go to jujitsu.net. There is a thing, it says free ebook or focused jiu-jitsu ebook. You get a free ebook and you join my email list, and you'll get an email from me typically Monday through Friday, sometimes Saturday. And you can get the free resources, and you can cancel at any time and unsubscribe. But it's free, and a lot of times these sort of philosophical ramblings and ideas sort of make their start there. And honestly, if you're trying to get a hold of me, typically I reply back to my email list before I get back to anybody else. So if that interests you, check that out at jujitsu.net.
And I enjoy them. They're great. A lot of people say they're part of their kind of morning routine. So it also gives us a little insight into your little brain, what it's doing.
Yeah, it's not very big. I got big old dinosaur brains.
But they're great emails, man. They're always well written, and you throw a little joke in there from time to time, which is fun.
Mm-hmm.
I always enjoy them. But as always, guys, thank you, Chewy.
Guys, it was nice having you here today. Just gonna kind of wander off and talking for a second. I always wonder, this is always what I wonder when we're at this point, because I always wonder, are people listening? Are they still listening to this podcast? Did they make it past the ending credits, or did they go, Chewy's talking about using promo codes again. I'm not doing that. I'm getting the hell out of here and listening to something else. I'm always wondering that. I'm wondering, did they make it through? Did they listen?
What do we want to do? Do you want to give them an incentive to listen to the end? Should we throw a little something in there?
Well, if I say something, then there's going to be like all of a sudden I'm going to get flooded with like 600 messages or something.
First message wins.
Here's what we're going to do. All right. So
we're doing this?
We're doing
really
this.
doing this. This is on the spot.
This
here.
is we didn't plan this, by the way. This is just me. Because I'm always curious. I genuinely am curious about whether or not you guys are actually listening to this stuff at the very end. Like in my Vault membership, I have a written newsletter, and in the written newsletter, I put literally smack dab in the middle of it. I'm like, if you're actually reading this, please send me a message, and I'll send you a gift. And I send them a gift. So we're going to do the same thing here.
All right.
If you're actually listening to this, if it's Monday morning, you're driving, and you said, you know what, I'm going to listen to this podcast all the way through, then I commend you, my friend. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to pull off to the side because I don't want you texting and driving. You don't want to do that, but you don't want to miss out. So here's what you're going to do. Everybody's got at least the Instagram or a Facebook. So one of those, you got one of them probably, unless you're like, whatever, really worried about the data and stuff like that, which I can understand. I commend you. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to either go to Facebook or Instagram, like the page, and then send us a message and say, I'm listening, capital letters, exclamation point, some of them turned into ones. And then you're going to let us know that you were listening to the podcast, and then we're going to send you something.
What's that something going to be? Do we know?
It might be a physical gift. It might be a digital product that I offer, that Eugene offers. Who knows? You'll find out. It'll be a surprise. Surprises are wonderful, right? That's why Christmas is so fun. You don't know what the hell you're getting. It's all wrapped up in paper.
Do you want to cap it? How many are you going to cap it at?
We're capping it at number one.
That's
one.
it.
So we're going to do one. So you better be quick about this. That's what I'm saying. So if right now if you're listening to this and you're driving in your car and you're like, going to work, right? You're like, this is going to be a great day.
Use your turn signal. Veer off the side of the road carefully, merging one lane at a time.
Put your flashers on.
Thank you. Emergency flashers if you have to.
Yeah, I don't want you
Safety first.
I don't want you to get hurt doing this, I want you to be safe. Say safety first. But go ahead and get that message to us super quickly because you don't want to miss out. And you know what? Hell, I'm feeling generous. Two. First two.
It is.
First two. So the first two that get back to us that say, I'm listening, we'll get back to you and we'll give you something as a gift for listening to the end of this long ramble that God knows what we're doing.
The podcast was 15 minutes. The intro and outro was a half hour apiece.
Oh man!
Well, it's just the intro and outro. There's
That's
a little podcast.
So anyway, guys, thank you for being here on the podcast today, and we'll talk to you next week.